Imagine a world, vast and unknown, where the edge of the map was not a boundary, but a terrifying mystery. A time when the very concept of sailing west to reach the east was considered madness, a fool's errand that promised only certain death. But what if one man, driven by an unshakable belief and an audacious vision, dared to challenge that fear? What if he embarked on a journey that would forever alter the course of human history, not just for the lands he discovered, but for the profound and often dark ripple effects that followed? This isn't just a tale of exploration. It's a story of ambition, discovery, and the complex legacy of a voyage that changed everything. Get ready to uncover the true narrative behind Christopher Columbus. Today, we're diving deep into the story of a figure whose name echoes through history, yet whose true narrative is far more intricate and at times uncomfortable than the simplified versions we often hear. Christopher Columbus, not just a name in a textbook, but a real person with dreams, flaws, and an impact that still shapes our world centuries later. Our story begins not with triumph, but with struggle. Christopher Columbus was born Cristoforo Colombo in Genoa, Italy, in 1451. He wasn't born into royalty or immense wealth. His father was a wool weaver, and young Christopher grew up in a bustling port city, surrounded by ships, sailors, and the intoxicating allure of the open sea. This environment ignited a spark in him, a fascination with the ocean and the mysteries it held. From a young age, Columbus took to the sea, learning the ropes as a merchant sailor. He traveled extensively, navigating the Mediterranean, and even venturing into the Atlantic, reaching as far north as Iceland and as far south as the coast of West Africa. These voyages weren't just about trade. They were his education. He absorbed knowledge of currents, winds, and navigation techniques, honing skills that would later define his destiny. He was a keen observer, a self-taught cartographer, and a voracious reader of geographical texts and ancient maps, often those filled with mythical creatures and speculative landmasses. But beyond the practical skills, Columbus harbored a grander obsession: finding a westward sea route to Asia. Why was this so important? The Silk Road, the traditional land route, was long dangerous and increasingly controlled by the Ottoman Empire, making trade with the lucrative markets of the East incredibly difficult and expensive. Spices, silks, and precious goods from India and China were in high demand in Europe, and whoever found a direct sea route would control immense wealth and power. Most scholars of the time knew the Earth was round, but they drastically underestimated its size. Columbus, however, had his own calculations based on a mix of reputable sources and some rather optimistic interpretations. He believed Asia was much closer to Europe if one simply sailed west across the Atlantic. This was his audacious vision, one that put him at odds with the conventional wisdom of his era. With his radical idea firmly entrenched, Columbus needed funding, and lots of it. Building and outfitting ships for such a perilous journey was an enormous undertaking, far beyond his own means. Thus began his decade-long quest for patronage, a grueling period that tested his resilience and belief. His first stop was Portugal, the leading maritime power of the day. King John II of Portugal had a formidable team of navigators and cartographers. Columbus presented his plan, brimming with confidence. But the Portuguese experts, after careful consideration, rejected him. Their own calculations, more accurate than Columbus's, showed the proposed westward route to be far too long for his small fleet, requiring supplies that simply couldn't be carried. They politely, but firmly, dismissed his claims. Undeterred, Columbus packed his bags and headed for Spain, a kingdom still consolidating its power under the formidable rule of Isabella I of Castile and Ferdinand II of Aragon. For years, he pleaded his case to anyone who would listen, from nobles to court officials. He was seen as a persistent, perhaps even a slightly irritating, figure, often dismissed as a dreamer with unrealistic demands. Picture this: a man, probably looking a bit disheveled from years of travel and failed pitches, standing before the most powerful monarchs in Europe, asking for an unprecedented amount of money and resources for a journey everyone else thought was suicidal. It's hard to imagine the sheer tenacity required. Finally, after nearly 7 years of rejection and on the brink of giving up, fate intervened. Spain had just achieved a monumental victory, conquering the last Moorish stronghold in Granada. With the war over and the royal coffers potentially more open, Isabella and Ferdinand were persuaded, partly by the enthusiasm of some influential supporters and perhaps, in part, by the sheer audacity of the idea. They also didn't want Portugal to get ahead if Columbus, by some slim chance, was right. The terms of the agreement were extraordinary. Columbus demanded and received not only funding for 3 ships, but also a significant percentage of any riches discovered, governorship of any new lands, and the hereditary title of Admiral of the Ocean Sea. These were incredibly high stakes, reflecting both his conviction and the monarch's desperation to catch up in the race for new trade routes. On August 3, 1492, Christopher Columbus, commanding the Santa Maria, along with 2 smaller caravels, the Pinta and the Nina, set sail from Palos de la Frontera, Spain. This wasn't just a journey. It was a leap of faith into a world of terrifying unknowns. The crew, numbering around 90 men, were a mix of experienced sailors, adventurers, and even some pardoned criminals seeking a fresh start. For weeks, they sailed west, the known world receding behind them, replaced by an endless expanse of ocean. The days were long, the provisions dwindling, and the psychological toll immense. Fear and doubt began to ripple through the crew. Sailors were superstitious, prone to believing in sea monsters and the flat earth myth. Despite evidence to the contrary, murmurs of mutiny began to spread. Imagine the pressure on Columbus. He was charting a course through uncharted waters, both literally and metaphorically. He kept 2 logs, one accurate for his own navigation and another doctored with shorter distances to reassure his increasingly anxious crew. He had to be a leader, a psychologist, and a visionary all at once. Then, after over 2 months at sea, signs of land began to appear. Migrating birds, fresh-water plants, even a carved stick. Hope surged, and on October 12, 1492, at approximately 2 a.m., a lookout on the Pinta, Rodrigo de Triana, spotted land. "Tierra! Tierra!" he cried. It wasn't Asia, as Columbus believed, but an island in the Bahamas, which he named San Salvador. This moment marked a pivotal turning point, not just for Columbus, but for the world. It was the first recorded encounter between Europeans and the indigenous peoples of the Americas, initiating a chain of events with profound and lasting consequences. Stepping onto the shores of San Salvador, Columbus and his crew encountered the Taino people. These were a peaceful, agricultural society, living in harmony with their lush environment. They were generous, curious, and initially welcoming. Columbus described them as naked as they were born and marveled at their simple way of life. His initial observations, recorded in his journal, reveal a mix of genuine wonder and disturbing pragmatism. He noted their beautiful canoes, their unique customs, but also immediately began to assess their potential as laborers and their gold ornaments as a sign of wealth. He wrote, "They would make fine servants. With 50 men, we could subjugate them all and make them do whatever we want." This single statement is a chilling foreshadowing of what was to come. For the next few months, Columbus explored the Caribbean, landing on Cuba and Hispaniola, present-day Haiti and the Dominican Republic. He was still convinced he had reached the East Indies, hence the enduring misnomer Indians for the native inhabitants. He established a small settlement, La Navidad, on Hispaniola, leaving behind some of his crew, and then prepared for his return journey. His return to Spain was a sensation. He brought back samples of gold, exotic plants, and several Taino captives. Dressed in their traditional attire, he was hailed as a hero, a visionary who had opened up a new world. The monarchs were ecstatic. Europe was abuzz with the news of the new world, though its true nature was yet to be understood. Columbus undertook 3 more voyages across the Atlantic, further exploring the Caribbean, parts of Central America, and the northern coast of South America. But these subsequent expeditions saw a dramatic shift from initial exploration to brutal exploitation. The dream of quick riches fueled an increasingly ruthless agenda. The Spanish, driven by a thirst for gold, began to enslave the Taino people, forcing them to mine for precious metals under horrific conditions. Those who resisted faced brutal violence, mutilation, and death. The population of Hispaniola, estimated to be hundreds of thousands, if not millions, before Columbus's arrival, plummeted catastrophically due to forced labor, disease, and warfare. European diseases, like smallpox and measles, to which the indigenous populations had no immunity, swept through the communities with devastating effect. Entire villages were wiped out. The advanced weaponry of the Spanish, combined with the spread of disease, created an imbalance of power that was insurmountable for the native peoples. Columbus, despite his initial promises of converting the Indians to Christianity, became an increasingly harsh and tyrannical governor. His administration was marked by cruelty, mismanagement, and a failure to establish a stable, humane colony. Even his own men revolted against him, sending complaints back to Spain about his governance. Eventually, he was arrested and sent back to Spain in chains, stripped of much of his authority, though later pardoned by the monarchs. This period is a stark reminder that discovery for one group often meant devastation for another. The legacy of Columbus is not just about courage and navigation. It's also about the beginning of transatlantic slavery, the systematic oppression of indigenous peoples, and the profound environmental changes brought by European colonization. Christopher Columbus died in 1506, still believing he had found a route to Asia. He went to his grave largely uncelebrated by the general public, overshadowed by others who followed him, and the growing understanding that he had discovered an entirely new continent. The continent, in fact, was named America after another explorer, Amerigo Vespucci, who correctly identified it as a new world. So, how do we reconcile the figure of Christopher Columbus? Was he a heroic explorer, a man of vision and unparalleled navigational skill? Absolutely. He dared to go where no European had gone before, proving the possibility of transatlantic travel and forever shrinking the perceived size of the world. His voyages undeniably kick-started an era of unprecedented global exchange, the Columbian Exchange, of goods, ideas, plants, animals, and unfortunately, diseases. But was he also a ruthless colonizer, an instigator of slavery, and a harbinger of immense suffering for millions of indigenous people? Undeniably, yes. The historical records, including his own journals and the accounts of his contemporaries, paint a picture of a man driven by ambition and religious fervor, but also capable of extreme brutality in his pursuit of wealth and power. The modern understanding of Columbus requires holding both truths simultaneously. He was a product of his time, operating within the moral framework of 15th century Europe, where conquest and religious conversion often went hand in hand with exploitation. Yet, acknowledging that historical context does not absolve him or diminish the horrific suffering inflicted upon the indigenous populations. For many indigenous communities today, Columbus Day is not a celebration, but a day of mourning and remembrance for the ancestral lands lost, the cultures destroyed, and the lives brutally taken. It's a day to reflect on the lasting impact of colonialism and to honor the resilience of native peoples who have survived centuries of oppression. The true narrative of Christopher Columbus is not a simple story of good versus evil, but a complex tapestry woven with threads of incredible human achievement, profound cultural exchange, and devastating human cost. It forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about our history and to understand that progress for one group often comes at a steep price for another. What can we learn from this complex legacy? Firstly, that history is rarely black and white. Simplistic narratives often obscure crucial details and perspectives. Secondly, that the past shapes our present. The ripple effects of 1492 are still felt today in geopolitical power structures, cultural identities, and ongoing struggles for justice. And finally, it teaches us the importance of critically examining the stories we are told and seeking out multiple perspectives to form a more complete understanding of our world. The story of Christopher Columbus is a powerful reminder that heroes are often flawed, and that discovery is always seen differently by those on either side of the encounter. It challenges us to reflect on the nature of ambition, the consequences of power, and the enduring human quest for both glory and exploitation. We hope this deep dive into the true narrative of Christopher Columbus has given you a fresh perspective and sparked your curiosity. If you found this journey into history as fascinating as we did, consider diving deeper into other untold stories. There's a whole world of history waiting to be explored, and we're just getting started.